Hi everyone! I want to talk about how I think the landscape looks for creating websites with microservices and multiple teams. For a large enough problem, you'll need more than one team. One good rule of thumb how large a team should be is that if you can't feed a team with 2 pizzas, it's too large. Depending on the size of the pizzas, this means roughly 5 to 10 people in a team. In a microservice architecture, each team is responsible for one or more services. These services can be developed and deployed independently, so that teams don't have to wait for each other. If integration of the services is needed, the teams have to agree on the interface and the method of integration. In this architecture, the teams have more freedom to write services in different languages and platforms, if needed. This way, teams can experiment with different technologies and evolve the system over time in a much easier way than if you only allow one language or platform at a single point in time. Also, different types of teams may need different technologies. Maybe one team has a need for scaling up in terms of performance, and another team has a need for scaling out in terms of features. Typically, it's hard to fulfill both of these needs with one technology, and by allowing both technologies to live side by side, you get a better overall system design. There's of course a cognitive limit to this reasoning. Having a unique language or platform for each service is going to make it harder for people within the organization to move between teams, and also for new employees to get up to speed. So, you need to find a balance between system diversity and creating internal standards. But it's not only the size of the teams and services that matter. It's also important how the slicing of the organization and services is done. Slicing horizontally is guaranteed to have dependencies between the services and teams in order to deliver functionality to the end user. Simplified, in order for a backend story to be used by an end user, it needs to wait for the front-end team to develop functionality that use that backend story. If we want to keep our 2-pizza team rule, it's easy to see that slicing this way doesn't necessarily scale very well. Instead, slicing vertically decreases the amount of dependencies between services in order to deliver end-user functionality. Then, maybe there are one or more teams responsible for infrastructure, depending on the size of the organization. But slicing vertically doesn't mean that there can't or shouldn't be any collaboration between the services. Think, for example, of a shopping cart in an e-commerce website. It doesn't make sense that each team should re-implement the shopping cart for each service that needs to display the shopping cart, right? Also, it's probably important to show products with images and prices in different types of pages. Letting each team implement this by themselves is both ineffective and error-prone. Meanwhile, in web development, we have the recent years seen a big growth in the usage of client-side JavaScript frameworks and libraries. There are some drawbacks to this though, such as decreased initial performance, search engine support, and general error resilience during flaky network conditions. One approach to get rid of these drawbacks is to do both. That is, server-side render an initial response to the browser, and after that, load the JavaScript application. This approach is called isomorphic or universal web applications. But one thing that is often neglected is the amount of time it takes to parse JavaScript. According to Multi-Able, it takes around 1 second for a typical mobile device to parse 1 megabyte of JavaScript. During this time, the browser is unresponsive and unusable. Now, mobile has become more and more dominant for end consumers. The sales of desktop computers is stagnating at best, but the sales of mobile devices is increasing every year, and it's predicted that this trend will continue. It makes little sense to develop a website today that only targets desktop computers. Now, let's look at all of these areas together: microservices, organization, and web development. How can we develop websites using microservices and multiple teams? We want to keep our 2-pizza team ID in order to be effective. We want to have at least one service per team, and the services should be independently deployed. We want to allow for technology experimentation and to be able to gradually evolve from one technology to another maybe over a long period of time. Also, different teams might have different needs, which is another argument for some diversity of technologies. We also want to organize ourselves in verticals in order to minimize dependencies and bottlenecks between teams. Further, we want our website to work well on mobile devices. Exactly what this means depends on what market segment you want to target, but not all organizations can or want to target their products or services to only the premium market segment. Let's do a thought experiment. One e-commerce team has made a shopping cart in a JavaScript framework, but the team that wants to use it has developed the front end of their services in another JavaScript framework. What's the integration story of these frameworks? Would they both support isomorphic rendering and together return an HTML response? Even if they would, the amount of JavaScript that the browser would need to parse would basically double in size. The problem is pretty much the same if you're using libraries instead of frameworks. And remember the performance penalty for JavaScript parsing. 1 megabyte is roughly 1 second of unresponsiveness on a typical mobile device. Going non-isomorphic would only increase the performance penalty. So, I think that client-side JavaScript has a problem with diversity. Therefore, this is a dead end, at least if you're targeting non-premium mobile users. I think there's a better way to build websites using microservices and multiple teams. If we instead use server-side rendering as much as possible, we get rid of the JavaScript integration and performance problems. Services can expose both full pages and partial fragments. Fragments can be reused between pages by using a technique called transclusion. We use transclusion every day when we include an image in an HTML page. The only difference is that we here transclude HTML instead. You can transclude content both on the client and server. But we also need a way to organize resources like CSS and JavaScript. You can of course still use JavaScript, but not as the foundation for everything. In short, I think that both global and local resources like CSS and JavaScript are needed. Also, it is still possible to share JavaScript enhanced components between services, even though you'll be more constrained here. In future videos, I'll talk about these ideas in more detail and link to them from here. Also, I'll put a few links in the description to this video if you want to know more. Thank you for listening to me. Cheers!